Good morning. We are going to call the Budget Committee meeting to order. We're going to wait to do roll call as the members start coming in. I just wanted to, first off, just to thank the entire committee, in fact, and all the subcommittee chairs. We had over 73 subcommittee hearings over the process. The budget process is obviously not done overnight. It's something that is very deliberative, has hours and hours of public comment where we have over hundreds, possibly even thousands of Californians that come up here to testify about every single issue, whether it's early childhood education, to the environment, to public safety, to every particular issue that we tackle in this state. And I'm very, very proud of the product that we have put together. We have not only saved more money into our rainy day fund, over $8 billion. It's the largest reserve we've had in quite a long time. We've also heavily invested in our future. We've put in over $600 million into early childhood education. We've invested back money into Cal State and UC, ensuring that in-state students will have those opportunities, that California students will have those opportunities to attend universities here at home, increasing slots and availability for them. We've also made sure that we're taking a step and taking our stab at providing some relief to our housing crisis up and down the state, a $650 million package to fund housing in a variety of different ways, from tax credits to homelessness to farm worker housing. Also, we've continued to prioritize clean air and clean water in the budget through our sub-3 process. We did have one significant objection compared to the governor's budget. That was the $250 million jail proposal that went through our public safety subcommittee. We thought that the $250 million was better spent in a variety of other areas that would really focus much more heavily on recidivism. It really doesn't help that we continue to fund jails that are continue to be at overcapacity. We have to carve out new solutions to ensure that once people serve their time, they're not ending up back in jail. So we decided to really find other ways to invest in California's future so that we weren't stuck footing the bill for the long term. Also, we conducted a significant amount of oversight throughout the various subcommittee hearings, whether it's in education around, in particular, University of California and the audit that was done, in sub 4 around the Board of Equalization, as well as the DMV received some subcommittee oversight. But with that, I'm very, very proud of the 4-month subcommittee process that, again, was a bipartisan process. Members of both parties were invited to attend and be part of that deliberation. How they chose to deliberate was really left to the people on the individual members of the subcommittee. But I'm very proud of the product that we've put forward for California. And with that, I'll have to turn over to my Vice Chair, Mr. Obernor, to see if he has any comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, sorry.
Well, that was the sugar part of it. What I was saying is I wanted to say a big thank you to everyone in this room who's worked so diligently over the last 4 months to craft this budget. It's an extremely time-consuming and difficult process. This is the most complex state budget in the nation, and it is an incredible amount of work. And there is certainly a lot to praise in the Assembly budget. This budget provides increased funding for all levels of education, from primary schools all the way through to our universities. I think that's a very worthwhile investment in California's future. I'm also gratified to see that this budget implements the governor's proposal to deposit an additional $2 billion in the state's budget stabilization account, which will help us to respond to future economic downturns. However, even without a recession, the Department of Finance estimates that California will have a $4 billion budget deficit by fiscal year 2019-2020. And should a recession occur, the Moody's credit rating agency recently issued a report in which they rank California amongst the worst prepared states in the nation to weather a recession. In that event, our budget stabilization account would be completely inadequate to cope with the decline in state tax revenues. Unfortunately, the Assembly budget that we are considering today makes this problem worse, not better. This budget is unquestionably riskier than the budget that was presented to us by the administration because it commits the state to even higher levels of recurring government spending. The level of new spending in this budget cannot be maintained and can only lead in the future to a painful choice between either tax increases on the one hand or budget cuts on the other. For that reason, I must recommend a no vote on the current Assembly budget. However, I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues through the conference process in the coming weeks to craft an improved state budget, which I will hope would address some of these concerns. With that, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. With that, I'd like to allow the subcommittee chairs to walk us through each of the different subcommittee recommendations to the full Assembly Committee. With that, I'd like to start with Mr. Thurman, who chairs Subcommittee Number 1.
I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak about this budget, and thank you for your leadership in this process. And as you pointed out, it is rare that we have the circumstances to be able to tend to those who have the greatest needs and at the same time promote the kind of financial stewardship of our public resources that we are doing by taking care of all these needs and still putting a great deal of money into the rainy day fund. So thank you for your leadership and your framing. I want to thank the members of the subcommittee. Number one, Assembly members Bonta, Chu, Grove, and Harper for their great work. It was mentioned that we had 70-some hearings this year. I feel like they were all in Sub 1. And I want to thank our colleagues for really working together closely on many issues and across the aisle. I also want to give special thanks to a non-committee member who's given us our first task. We're going to have a special hearing in the next several weeks on the issue of Denti-Cal and how to increase access while we struggle around rates. And I want to thank Assembly member Mainshine for bringing forward interest in how we might look to the future to address the issues of Denti-Cal going forward. As a 20-year social worker, someone who's worked with people with disabilities, with youth and seniors, I couldn't be more proud of what the Assembly is putting forward in the budget for the Health and Human Services area. That this Assembly started this year by providing nearly $300 million for funding to support Californians who live with a developmental disability is record-setting. Its impact is incredible. It ultimately saves money for the state of California by ensuring that people live with great quality lives and in the community and not in institutional care. This subcommittee and this Assembly has made seniors a priority and has taken action to increase a COLA for seniors and also to put forward money to support nutrition assistance, has once again put forward prioritization for our foster youth to make sure that any young person who is in foster care who wants to go to college can be eligible for Chafee funding, to make sure that any young person who was in foster care, regardless of if they reunited with their family, can have transitional housing through the THP Plus housing program. When we do these things, we keep our youth from being homeless. We, again, save money for the state of California, and we help our young people to live a great life regardless of the difficult circumstances under which their lives have begun. This budget recognizes that there are millions of Californians who are ready to become citizens, who are eligible to become citizens, and puts an investment into naturalization that helps to strengthen California families and also brings more money to the state of California. Recognizing that there are barriers to health in California, this budget puts $100 million in ensuring that there will be physicians available and residents in all communities through a traditional program like Song Brown or through teaching community health centers in rural areas, in urban areas, wherever there may be access issues. This budget says that health is a priority. And when we provide health directly through physician care, we reduce the cost that the state has to pay to make up for the fact that there are not physicians. This budget is forward-thinking on dental needs. It restores funding to the dental disease prevention program to help millions of California children in schools get access to support to prevent disease. It recognizes that we have very interesting ways to support through virtual dental programs that we can also help to close the gap in areas that do not have access. And I want to mention a very important development that has been taken in this budget, our ability to repeal the maximum family grant rule, to work with our families who are in the deepest levels of poverty to ensure that they can have support as their family changes, that they should have continued support, that this subcommittee, that this assembly has figured out how to fund that action and has identified a funding source for how to fund that work going forward called the Child Poverty and Family Supplemental Support Subaccount, which generates money in support of child works, which essentially in the next few years, in just a few years, would allow us to take on the expenses of repealing the maximum family grant with no impact to the general fund. Mr. Chair, I appreciate your framing of these issues, that we're being fiscally prudent, but taking care of those who need the greatest help, and it is our honor to submit these on behalf of Sub 1. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Thurmond. I was remiss. I did want to thank all the members of the various subcommittees, as well as the Budget Committee staff and Finance and the Legislative Analyst Office. I know that obviously as members we put in quite a bit of work, but obviously it doesn't begin to compare the amount of hours that the staff really puts into this proposal. So thank you very much to all our staffs. With that, Mr. McCarty, Chair of Subcommittee Number 2 on Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your leadership. Of course, you started the year on Sub 2, so you had a bit in the early hearings, and we did spend countless hours in this subcommittee as well. And I also want to recognize the bipartisan work of our committee members, Mr. Chavez, Ms. Kim, Ms. Irwin, and Mr. O'Donnell, and also thank our staff, Mark and Katie and Christian and Amy from the Republican side worked well together and putting, frankly, a great education plan this year, a robust plan from P through 16. Probably not as robust as last year's budget, but something we can be really proud of. I want to start with the K-12 section and then focus on what I think are the really highlights of this budget are the bookends, early education and higher education. So from K-12, we continue the effort to fully fund our local control funding formula. We put about $3 billion in new resources on the table to do this. We're about halfway there where we need to go by 2020-21. We also give our LEAs about $1.2 billion in one-time money, helping pay down our mandate backlog. For our after-school programs, we know it's a priority to make sure that kids after school have safe places to go, and we know that it's prime time for juvenile crime between the hours of 3 and 6, and some of our after-school programs have really taken a hit the last few years, so we give a first-time COLA to the ACES program. We also do some innovative approaches in K-12, focusing on restorative justice, one-time grants through CDE, through the Prop 47 process, as well as provide some resources to do breakfast after the bell to make sure kids are ready to learn in the classroom and don't go to school hungry. Dealing with the teacher shortage, we have a four-pronged approach dealing with this, focusing on loan forgiveness for first-time teachers, a campaign that the governor proposed to really go after recruiting people in the teacher workforce, as well as creating a 4-year bachelor's degree for people who can get their teacher credentials in 4 years without having to go through a 5th year. And lastly, we have a program to allow classified teachers to enter the teaching workforce. We continue funding as proposed by the governor with adult education and career tech. No new monies for those, but those are continued. As far as the bookends of this, I think, again, this is the highlight, the early education and higher education. From early ed, we know that all the vast research shows that the number one thing we can do to make sure young people have a good start in life and ready to learn when they enter kindergarten is invest in early education. We have a $618 million investment. About a third of that is in Prop 98. That's the state preschool program where we increase slots by 10,000 full-day and part-day preschool slots. We also have 6,000 new voucher child care slots, and that's in the non-98. We increase rates, which will make the programs more viable to actually serve the families that are important. And then the other piece, which I think is really critical, is expanding eligibility. Some people with the minimum wage increase, they're not rich by any means, but they make a little too much to even become eligible for our state preschool program. So we just the eligibility for the first time in many years. And so this is something that we think is a critical down payment to student success. So that's our early education package. As far as higher education, enrollment growth is such a key issue. Every member up here wants to support more funding for community colleges and CSU and UC to serve more California students. We do that. We have funding for 23,000 new community college students, funding for 5,000 new UC students, and 12,000 more CSU students. The CSU budget, we fully fund the request from the system to allow enrollment growth, but also fund things like summer school. We know that we have graduation rate issues at our CSU. We provide monies for CSU for the first time in many years to have summer school to allow students to try to get their degree in a shorter period of time. For the UC system, we think, we spent a lot of time talking on this. I'm really proud of the bipartisan idea we have here, really a three-pronged approach dealing with the issues of access for California students and, frankly, the rationing of California slots in the last 10 years with more and more non-residents from overseas and other states. And so we have, I think, a solid plan, a shared sacrifice plan, having the state of California put in some money, having the UC make some efficiencies of the Office of the President and throughout the UC system, and have non-resident students pay a little bit more to make sure we could expand access at the UC. We also fund outreach programs to make sure lower income and underrepresented populations through programs like MESA and Puente and EOP have an opportunity to get to college, both at the UC, CSU, and the community college system. And lastly, as far as financial aid, the Cal Grant program, we know that our competitive Cal Grant, too many people apply every year and aren't eligible to receive the grant. Roughly 1 in 13 eligible Cal Grant recipients actually get it, and so we increased that number by 5,000 new Cal Grants this year, so hoping to expand access to higher education and be a ticket to the middle class. Again, I think this is a robust P through 16 education package, and pleased to present to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. McCarty. Madam Secretary, could we please call the roll?
Yes. Ting.
Here.
Obernolte.
Here.
Allen. Bigelow.
Present.
Bloom.
Here.
Bonta.
Here.
Campos.
Here.
Chu.
Here.
Chavez.
Here.
Cooper.
Present.
Gordon.
Here.
Grove. Harper.
Present.
Holden.
Here.
Irwin.
Here.
Kim. Here. Lackey.
Here.
McCarty.
Here.
Melendez. Mullen. Nazarian.
Present.
O'Donnell. Patterson.
Here.
Rodriguez.
Here.
Thurman.
Here.
Wilk.
Present.
Williams.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you. With that, we'll continue with the presentations. Mr. Bloom with Subcommittee 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. This is the third year that I've had the honor of chairing Budget Sub 3, where we have jurisdiction over natural resources and transportation. And I want to begin by thanking Assembly members Rich Gordon, Das Williams, Frank Bigelow, and Jim Patterson for their hard work the entire year. I want to specifically call out, though, Mr. Gordon and Williams, for whom this will be their last term on the Budget Subcommittee. They've been with me throughout, and they've just done yeoman's work over the years. We're going to miss their sage advice and contributions to this subcommittee. But term limits do that to us, and so again, we'll miss them. I also want to thank our staff members, Gabrielle Meindl, Christian Griffith, John Kennedy, Robert Spiegel, and Daniel Ballin, who have been very helpful and really kept us moving all year long. The assistance we get from staff is invaluable. I think everybody knows we couldn't get these jobs done without them. So on to the business at hand. Much of the committee's focus this year was on the same issue that we focused on for the past few years, and that is water. While we still had we were fortunate to have a wet year this year, and our reservoirs got much needed relief. The snowpack is still down, and the 5-year drought has severely impacted our environment, with many impacts that are going to go on for a number of years. And we still have communities that are without water. Since the governor announced a water emergency in early 2014, the committee has acted by appropriating nearly $3.7 billion to assist drought-stricken communities, and much of this money was accelerated months ahead of the budget process. The people needed work done, and we acted without reservation in concert with the administration and the Senate to make sure that that happened. This year, we approved another $334.5 million, which included $212 million from the general fund to continue our state's emergency response to the drought. This money is going to fund getting water deliveries to people who still have dry wells or contaminated water supplies. Other projects will include improving salinity barriers to protect clean water supplies and hatchery improvements as fish populations have been decimated by the drought conditions. That's particularly true for our salmon populations. We've also provided $11 million to remove dead trees in high fire hazard areas. There's been widespread media attention on the tree mortality problem as a result of 5 years drought, which has been compounded by a bark beetle infestation that's been going on for many years now. We have approximately 26 million dead trees in our forests, and they are contributing on a daily basis to a significant fire hazard. From Proposition 1 passed by the voters 2 years ago, we appropriated $465 million to meet the state's commitments under the Klamath agreements. That was $250 million. The Central Valley Project Improvement Act, $90 million. The Salton Sea Project, $80 million. And the San Joaquin River settlements of $45 million. Also related to the drought is $36 million to improve our wildfire response capabilities, including $12 million to purchase a helicopter as part of a pilot project as we begin to upgrade our firefighting air support fleet. I would remind members and the public that our current helicopter fleet is Vietnam era, unable to fly at night, and we are at the point where we're going to begin, if we don't start replacing the fleet, to run out of spare parts. So this has been a ongoing concern for the subcommittee, and it's good to know that we're going to be moving forward with this program. We appropriated $10 million this year to improve access to drinking water in schools. There are approximately 1,000 schools across the state of California that still do not have access to clean drinking water. We're spending another $1 million to collect better data on what areas around the state still need water to meet other federal EPA requirements. Our goal, particularly with the data collection, is to get a handle on where we might have lead or other contamination problems and make the necessary appropriation next year to fix the problem. We want to be proactive on this issue, and we know that many of these problems are existing in our disadvantaged communities. To that end, we also appropriated $10 million, which was $5 million above what the governor proposed, to provide grants to communities for interim and permanent solutions to communities in need of emergency deliveries or connections to nearby water systems, I should say. We also appropriated $2.1 million to assist with continued rescue efforts of stranded seals and sea lion pups due to warming ocean conditions over the past couple of years related to El Nino. There has been a surge of sea lion and elephant seal pups washing up along California coasts, and the rescue network simply did not have the funds to work on this unprecedented scale. California has also seen a surge in whale entanglements that are largely a result of being entangled in crab pot lines, but other commercial fishing gear as well. Prior to 2000, we had approximately 3 to 5 entanglements per year, and in 2015 we had 61. There's a volunteer network, an entirely volunteer network, that has been addressing this issue, but without some additional funds, they're not going to be able to continue their work. Lastly, we created some fixes to California's beverage container recycling program. And I want to thank Mr. Gordon for working really hard to bring this issue home at the very last minute this year with a temporary resolution. Because due to the commodities drop in materials, more than 400 recycling centers have closed within the last year. These are the ones that we traditionally see in our grocery store parking lots. This year, we're proposing some short-term changes to the program that will bring these centers back online and prevent what would have been additional closures, perhaps closures of all of the remaining centers as soon as this summer. And finally, on transportation, the governor proposed to us a transportation infrastructure plan. That was rejected by the Assembly, and we look forward to working on details and hopefully working out a compromise in conference. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bloom. Mr. Nazarian, who chairs Subcommittee Number 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been a pleasure serving as chair of the Subforce on State Administration, and it's been wonderful, notably also to be working with my colleagues, Mr. Kevin Mullen, Jim Cooper, Travis Allen, as well as the honorary vice chair of our subcommittee, Mr. Scott Wilk, who we always find ourselves next to each other somehow. It's also wonderful to be working with staff members who have dedicated so much time and have worked so closely with all of the members, as well as myself and the chair of the Budget Committee, Genevieve Morelos, Jasmine Hicks, and Nicole Vasquez. Their work is the result of what we've been able to accomplish over the course of the last 6 months. There are many small moving parts in this committee, so I'm just going to focus on 3 or 4 of the big issue items. Housing, of course, being at the top of it, because this was something that had been brought by a working committee within the Assembly led by Mr. Chu and Thurmond, and this was an issue that was extremely important to many of my colleagues, spearheaded by a group of about 11 or so working group members. Ultimately, what we settled on was through the subcommittee was a $650 million investment into 11 programs, covering 4 specific areas, including rental housing for low-income families, programs for working families, farm worker housing, as well as homelessness. And that's something that I'm certain we're going to be continuing working on through a conference committee as well. Next is the approving of the governor's proposal of a $1.5 billion investment in our state infrastructure within just the Sacramento grid primarily also. Given the numerous individuals we have, visitors we have, constituents we have coming into and out of our state building, especially our state building and some other state buildings around, but especially of importance is the Capitol building. A major investment was necessary to be made to upgrade and also realize certain efficiencies that have been lacking over time and have further increased our maintenance of these buildings as well. And we made some minor tweaks and changes, including, of course, extending the dollars over a period of 4 years. Next area was the Board of Equalization, which saw some changes that attuned to about $11.2 million, but included certain accountability steps that would curtail some of the expenditures and set up an opportunity for us to have report backs and continuous dialogue. I think it was a very good first step. I look forward to the continued work that we're going to be doing with the board. And last but not least, seismic safety in a continuous effort to grow and strengthen our resiliency as a state and ensure that the housing stock isn't impacted, especially within that the affordable housing stock, which is so reliant on many older buildings and infrastructure. It was important for us to invest in a $20 million revolving fund program, as well as the ongoing brace and bolt program, combined for $23 million. And with that, thanks again, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nazarian.